This lecture, we're going to be talking about Trump on trade and how he really does not know what he's doing and he does not know anything on trade policy. This is going to go into both on trade policy in general and actually the idea of trade deficits and trade pluses on trade policy. Now, when we start to look at that, is he shows that he does not know anything when it comes down to it. Now, when you deal with the idea of a trade, either a trade plus or a trade minus on it, I'm dealing with that idea. This merely means how much money or how much goods you're actually getting in your system. If you have a trade deficit, this means you're spending more money and getting more goods. If you have if you're plus on trade, it means you're getting more goods and getting more money as an actual country. And it does not necessarily equate out to anything as meaning much. It's just an actual number and how they want to figure out things on what the actual country's doing. Is it a consumer nation or is it a seller nation? And this is really what it's doing when it comes down to things. Now, if it's a consumer nation, it will always produce a trade deficit. If you look at things such as Switzerland always produces a trade deficit. And this is because of the types of businesses it runs. It runs different things where it does not produce enough to sustain itself. So what it does is it uses those types of businesses to generate money, and uses that money to then produce and buy, to purchase those other goods from other countries. Now, does this mean that they're actually losing jobs, or they could do themselves, or does it mean that they're actually becoming for themselves? No. From this actual action, no, it does not mean that one side's actually stealing from the other or gaining from the other. No, these are actually voluntary trades, because you view it from actually the individual, and these are both from business to business and individuals buying from businesses overseas, as well as when it comes down to there's a lot of component parts being sold into the country, which help out individual businesses here. That's a lot of business to business trade, and that helps out natural businesses here for them to actually make their own products here at much lower cost to the U.S. consumer. U.S. consumer then buys the stuff here, which then creates a trade deficit. Now, obviously, when there's consumers that buy U.S. goods on U.S. shores, this does not add to any trade deficit. It doesn't actually add anything because nothing's moving. And there's what it calls Trump's idea is, we'll get people to buy our goods. Well, you can't force anybody to buy your goods from your companies. They actually have to voluntarily want to actually buy them. Now, what's actually stopping people from buying them is actually a very simple thing. When we actually look at our actual goods, we can actually see that they actually cost a lot more than other countries' goods, such as, like, let's say, for instance, automobiles. Automobiles of the same quality cost far more to produce in the United States than it does in many other countries. There are a couple of exceptions for wages such as in Europe and up in Japan, in which they're far more expensive, and that's because of regulatory reasons and because of the cost of inflation. But when we start to do that outside of there, you're going to see this Japan is actually producing cars at a lot faster rate. and when we have our workers here, our workers are not producing vehicles at a fast enough rate to be worthwhile, and the vehicles in Europe are usually of far better quality than what we're producing here. When it comes down to it, they have higher end vehicles than what we're producing, and they have a lot more prestige than what we produce here when it comes to a worldwide demand. So the actual demand outside of that is far greater. And then he's also brought the idea of like Harley Davidson bikes. Well, the fact is Harley Davidson bikes, first of all, they output a lot of decibels of noise, and not many people want that outside of our country, and not many areas will actually tolerate that. Most people want an actual bike that's going to be far less noisy, and because of most of their actual platforms and size, they're actually not going to, being physically larger, they're not going to be as valuable as something of another country's type of bike, such as bikes produced in areas like in Japan, or bikes produced in areas like the United Kingdom or in Italy, where they have far greater usage around the different areas of the world, as well as there's other bikes like produced in China and areas like Korea or even other countries that have a far better reaching output for what other countries need for either business, uh, for business usage or for personal usage. And this is what creates the actual amount. And when we look at the price of Harley Davidsons, they're actually very expensive compared to many other bikes. When we compare them in price, they are far greater in expense than many other bikes that are out there for actually standard bike production companies. And this is what causes a lot of other places to say we don't want them. And when we see this, this is why they're not going after it. Now, this is why Trump doesn't understand this when it comes down to these trade things. It's the products that we have here are not necessarily products that would have a great desire outside of our area, and you cannot force another place to buy it, nor can you actually force a company to actually manufacture and source all their parts within one country. We've seen what happens when you try and do that. That's what they've actually done in Venezuela. That's why we've seen where they've had a crumbling infrastructure and a crumbling economy when they were pretty much one of the top economies in the world. When we go as just only as far back as the 1970s, where they were one of the top economies in the world, once they started to slowly become a mixed economy and go from that mixed economy up into the full-blown socialist economy, it ended up totally destroying what they had built. And this is what ended up occurring. So when they did that, that's what ended up occurring. So what Trump advocates for forcing companies to do that, instead of actually advocating for a complete free market system where a company can do whatever they want, get the parts wherever they want, make the products wherever they want. That's something that basically that's what you're going to create. So all the companies are eventually going to leave, and you're not going to have any access to those products. And also putting things where saying your consumers in a country are not allowed to have a certain type of product because they don't like where a product's being made. This is Trump's spat with China, with Huawei. Now Huawei's they've shown that there's no problems with the products, such as the phones. They've shown when they get the plans of the 5G infrastructure out to the countries that there is no problem with the 5G infrastructure. They've given that out to other countries without any issues. It's shown that there is no backdoor system. The only types of backdoor systems we've ever seen is the backdoor system in which we've seen from the U.S. government and some of these other things of these government systems that are actually spying that way. And basically, your biggest spies in the world would be Israel, the U.S. government, and the British government are the ones that are actually doing the most spying globally. This whole thing of saying China with it, China does not really want to waste a lot of that military strength and military money establishing some global spy grid because when you use cyber warfare is very, very expensive and it can take whatever you could dish out physically and it costs far more money to do so. And that's why when you look at our system is far more expensive if we add in what we're doing in our uh, civilian intelligence plus our actual military. You can actually see that we are actually spending an astronomical amount of money. We're talking well into probably in that $1.5 trillion, and next to what China is spending is we're talking at most we're talking maybe about a third of that, and that's their high. At a high point. Uh, I mean, not even a third of probably like a sixth of that. We're talking about $250 billion, maybe about $300 billion at most, and that's probably about where they're tied at with it. I mean, even if they start skyrocketing, going up to about 500 billion, including everything, that would be astronomical for them. And that's something that we need to understand with everything. Now, when we start to look at this is where his ideas on trade don't really make any sense, and they line perfectly up with the ideas of Bernie Sanders. Now, he does not understand why we start to lose jobs in certain areas. Now, we start to lose jobs in certain areas because of technological advancements, not that some other country are stealing our jobs. This is the idea of basically it takes of the of basically an old adage basically where you start with a stick to dig a hole and then you basically where you're basically to dig a hole you're starting with like let's say 100 people to dig one hole. Then you go down to basically because now you have now you're basically going up to shovels. Now you uh now you can go down to basically like 10 people to dig it, and then you're down to one person that's using some type of machinery that can dig that one hole, and then not only does the number of people go down, the amount of time goes down from what could be a whole day at first, could be maybe the second time, could be maybe we're talking a few hours for the next one to get the proper size hole. The next one could be maybe like about 15, 20 minutes for the last one with one guy with a big piece of machinery. And to see our jobs, we're losing jobs in these certain sectors. And this is what's happening. We're losing jobs in these certain sectors because they're basically no longer needed because they're highly dangerous sectors. And instead of having these massively dangerous jobs, we're actually having machinery do it. You look at the manufacturing of cars, we don't do these things by hand anymore. Most jobs in manufacturing of cars are done by machinery. Now he was complaining uh, within a couple of years into his administration that we lost half the number of people in Detroit that were manufacturing cars. That's because the fact is we've actually gone to machines making cars, and this is something that he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand that basically, since machines make cars, now that you don't need you don't need all of these people making cars anymore. Most people, when they're doing these things with it, is they don't need all hands-on work. There aren't all these people that are having to do all these menial jobs to manufacture cars anymore. And, and this is the whole thing that you don't need all of these people anymore. And it's a good thing because the fact is we can raise this and it allows people to create more businesses. Well, the fact is many people that have lived here for a long time are not creating businesses, and that's what's happening. And this is part of where we start to get that fear that immigrants, because immigrants are creating these businesses and they're seeing immigrants get ahead, I think is part of the fear. And then they're seeing the jobs. Some of these union people are seeing the jobs disappear. Well, the fact is because they price themselves out of the market because the jobs just frankly aren't there. When you start to do all these things, you start to create these situations. Now, the fact is it's basically the whole situation why we don't have these jobs. Uh, Coming about with it a lot more is through government regulations and to decide, are we going to go mechanized or are we going to keep working with these members who keep raising their costs well beyond the actual legitimacy to keep their actual system going. And this is something that they've actually not understood. Now, when we start to go with the idea of when we see the idea on some of these immigrants trying to come in, immigrants can't get jobs, and this is where we see them kind of work under the table. And this creates another problem as well. And we could actually get rid of kind of work under the table. And this creates another problem as well. And, and we could actually get rid of this with some of this by eliminating a lot of these barriers. And it's all these barriers from that and also from the government. The government creates a lot of barriers through licensing, these other things like this that are not meant to keep you safe. They're meant to actually block people from entering for this. And it should be something very, very simple of why this happens. And we should realize that this is what they're trying to do. That's how much better this is going to be for us. When we realize that we're an actual consumer nation, we're going to realize that we just naturally do deficits. If you're a country that has a situation where you have the natural reserve, you have the universal reserve currency, you're actually in a situation to have you are a consumer nation you are a consumer nation. The end result, 100% of the time, is always going to be that you are going to have a trade deficit. Uh, this is always what ends up happening, and there's nothing any country can do about it. Because the fact is you're going to be consuming more than you're actually then you're actually selling out. It'd be a lot more expensive, and there's just not going to be as much to sell out there. Now, if you want to start selling products outside of the country, you're going to have a currency that's going to have to be linked to something that's going to be worthwhile to where it's not so expensive that other countries can actually afford it. Now, because our dollar has been so inflated, this makes it nearly impossible for other countries to do this. That's why, other than our own government working with a lot of these military contractors to sell things, we're not going to sell much other than that to other countries. So our actual things of sales are going to be very, very low. And we need to understand that this is kind of what we go after for our system. And we're not going to be selling a lot of 90% of its actual uh, spending of its purchasing power. And you're just not going to get that, and especially when we look at our debt, this has had a massive problem on our actual economy, and it's not going to get any better just by allowing uh, just by stating that we're going to keep on the same policy, and especially the same policy that we've been doing for about a quarter century of unbelievably low interest rates and continuing this process of inflating the currency even further, because we can't go much further to having the dollar lose even more and more of its value on a daily basis, because there's not much left of it. And this is the thing that basically is causing people to shy away from any type of uh, purchasing of goods for the United States because of the massive overinflation. I mean, we can actually see this through what's happening as we keep as we won't record it, and we'll just basically mark it down as in the relationship as a deflation of the Chinese currency when looking at the trade of the two currencies together, and this is where the problem comes. So instead of blaming the actual where it's coming from, the actual source, which is the massive inflation coming from the United States, they're blaming the actual country that's actually having sound currency, which is China, which is why China's having a lot better bang for the buck when it comes to money. Not saying that it's what it's called with some of the other things they've done negative, but one thing that they've done positively for the people is help them actually gain more money, and this is through the actual things of trade and linking their money to actually something with value. And this is something that should be considered as a positive for them. Now, when we look for how this is going to impact trade, is eventually they're going to basically say, "Hey, we find we find that we're basically giving up." Now, since Trump keeps wanting to put tariffs on China, that's probably going to come a lot faster uh, than it really should be coming, and that's going to lead for the United States to have to search to another country that's willing to take our useless dollars for actual goods that actually we need to survive as an actual consumer nation. And that's what's going to be happening very, very soon. And this is the thing why you never want to be launching trade wars. And this is where he not only does he not understand trade, in one point with it, he doesn't understand the idea of what trade deficits and with this. And that's about it. And bye, everyone.